On July 31st, the day my world cracked in two, my father received a phone call that changed everything. He was at work, buried in his usual routine, when his phone lit up with a number he recognized but never expected to see in that way. It wasn't a friend calling, not family, not an emergency number. It was a man who should have been nothing more than a colleague in my mother's life, a passing name at most. But that man called, and not just once. He called 3 times, each one like a hammer, striking down on the fragile glass of my father's life, and each time he made sure his voice carried the weight of what he had done. Imagine sitting in your office, surrounded by the dull hum of fluorescent lights and the steady ticking of the clock, when the voice of betrayal pierces through the ordinary air. Imagine the audacity of that man, picking up the phone and deciding he would be the one to dismantle 30 years of a marriage that was not his own. My father didn't want to believe it, not fully, but the repetition, the insistence, forced him to hear what no husband should ever have to hear. He came home that evening with a look in his eyes I had never seen before. I can still picture it, his shoulders sagging like someone had stolen the very bones that held him up, his voice rough, quiet, shaking, as though every word carried the weight of a storm. He confronted my mother, hoping, maybe even praying, that there had been some mistake, that this was all some twisted misunderstanding. But she looked at him, and she admitted it, just like that. And then she said the words that still haunt us both. She told him that her coworker was a real man for confessing, as though my father, the man who had loved her, who had sacrificed for her, who had carried her through years of hardship and joy, was supposed to stand there and admire the courage of the man who had destroyed his family. The cruelty of that line still echoes in my mind, as if she had carved it into the walls of our home, so neither of us could ever forget. But she didn't stop there. She went further, telling him how this other man claimed that my father didn't care about her, that he had failed her in ways my mother had never once spoken about. She had never voiced these supposed grievances, never given my father the chance to hear them or fix them, and now she used them like weapons, handed to her by someone who had no right to pass judgment on their marriage. She told my father she shouldn't have had to tell him at all, that somehow after 30 years together he should have just known, as though he were meant to be a mind reader instead of a husband. And then, almost mocking her own argument, she turned the knife again. She told him it wasn't his fault. She told him he was the perfect husband, that she was the one with the problems, that she was broken. It was a contradiction so sharp it left my father breathless. If he truly was the perfect husband, why was she standing there, unraveling everything they had built together? Why was she tearing apart the foundation of 30 years with her own hands? Later, we found out she had already signed a lease for an apartment, quietly, secretly, behind our backs. She had planned her escape. She was going to leave him without saying a word, without giving him even the dignity of a conversation. And while she packed this plan in silence, she still lay next to him at night. She still kissed him goodbye. She still whispered, "I love you," into the dark. I can't describe the cruelty of that performance. To live beside someone, to pretend you're still tethered to them, while plotting your departure. It isn't just betrayal, it's theater. She worked nights, and during the days when she should have been home sleeping, she began turning off her phone's location. At first we thought nothing of it, but then one day, her phone pinged for the last time at a Target parking lot before going dark. Hours passed. We were terrified something had happened to her. My father called me, his voice breaking with panic, as if every terrible possibility had suddenly become real. We thought she could have been hurt, abducted, lying somewhere in danger. But the truth was simpler and infinitely more cruel. She was with him. What kills me most is the timeline. Just weeks earlier, my parents celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. My father, with all the devotion in his heart, had planned something special, had poured his energy into marking 3 decades of partnership. But by then, she was already lying, already gone, already giving her heart to someone else. The affair began in April, months before the celebration. While he was searching for the right words and gestures to honor their story, she was rewriting it in secret. 8 years ago, they bought a house on a quiet lake. It was my father's dream, his sanctuary. He loved the stillness of the water, the way sunlight danced across the surface, The way mornings began with the hush of nature instead of the clamor of traffic. He would sit out there with his coffee and breathe in peace. That house was his place of safety, his proof that hard work and loyalty could build something beautiful. Now, he is terrified he will lose it. With the debt she left behind, with the mortgage that feels impossibly heavy, he faces the risk of watching his safe place crumble too. Already he has begun cutting away pieces of his life to survive. He canceled pet insurance. He let go of the small subscriptions that gave him comfort. He pares down, pares back, each decision like another small sacrifice to keep the one thing that feels steady beneath his feet. And yet even there, even at the lake, grief creeps in like a shadow. Sometimes he texts me, and those messages shatter me. He writes about the dog they got for her, sitting by the window, waiting faithfully for someone who has already left. He writes about seeing a baby deer by the water, and for a fleeting second he thought, I can't wait to tell her. Then he remembered, she's gone. It's like his instincts still reach for her, even though his mind knows she has abandoned him. And every time he realizes it, the wound reopens. When she came back to collect more of her belongings, she was cold. No apology, no sorrow, no regret. She didn't even pretend to carry guilt. Instead, she made him feel small in his own home, as though she were the one wronged, as though his heartbreak was nothing more than an inconvenience she had to step over. I watched him crumble in those moments, and I wanted to scream, to shake her, to demand she see the man she was dismantling piece by piece. But she didn't, or maybe she chose not to. The man she left him for is 39, barely separated, with 2 young children. A man who couldn't even keep his own house whole, who decided it was easier to destroy someone else's. My mother is 55, standing at the edge of retirement, but instead of stability, she's building her future on quicksand. She signed an apartment lease, likely under her own name, likely financed on her own. Yet she had the audacity to ask my father why he didn't leave her money for the apartment after he paid all the bills. Imagine the arrogance. To ask the man you've betrayed to fund your betrayal. Through all of this, she hasn't reached out to me. Not once. No explanations. No attempts to soften the blow. She told my father. She asked her lover if he understood what she was giving up. 30 years of marriage, her husband, her daughter. He said yes. And still, she did it. She still chose him. She chose to walk away knowing exactly what she was tearing apart. And so now I'm left trying to carry both my father's heartbreak and my own. I'm grieving too, but my grief feels complicated, like a storm that doesn't know where to land. I've lost the version of my mother I once believed in. I've lost the story of my family. I'm trying to be strong for my father, because if he falls apart completely, I don't know if I'll survive it. I tell myself I'll start healing once he begins to, that I'll let myself fall only after he finds a way to stand again. But inside, I'm already breaking. I'm already unraveling. I keep replaying that day in my head, the day everything fell apart. It wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was the way it unfolded, like a slow-motion train wreck you couldn't look away from. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I wasn't even drinking, listening as my father spoke in fragments, his voice tight and ragged. Each word was a splinter, each pause a knife. I tried to hold him, to offer comfort, but there's nothing to say when the ground beneath your family disappears. Nothing that can fill the void left by someone who has chosen to walk away so deliberately. I think about the mornings before all of this, the routine that seemed mundane then, but now feels sacred in memory. My parents would have breakfast together, the sun spilling across the kitchen table, my father reading the paper, while my mother hummed softly as she poured her coffee. There were small smiles, quiet exchanges, a lifetime of moments tucked into minutes. And now, those minutes feel like relics from another life. Every laugh they shared, every touch, every whispered "I love you" is tainted, rewritten by her choices.
I find myself remembering my own childhood through the lens of betrayal. The house by the lake wasn't just my father's sanctuary. It was ours. I remember summer evenings when the water reflected the sunset in molten streaks of gold and pink, when my mother and father would sit in silence, letting the lake carry their fatigue away. It was a place where nothing bad could reach us, a place where love seemed eternal. And now, even that lake feels fragile, as though it knows the truth and mourns with us. I watch my father wander through the rooms he built and maintained, touching furniture as if feeling for the presence of someone he thought he knew. It's like he's searching for a ghost, trying to remember how to live in a space that no longer feels safe.
I try to imagine what my mother is feeling, or not feeling. I want to understand her, to make sense of her decisions, but every attempt collapses under the weight of her coldness. Did she feel guilt at all when she signed the apartment lease? Did she think about the nights she spent in my father's bed, pretending, lying, or did she feel nothing, as if the past 30 years were disposable, easily exchanged for something that promised a new thrill? I can't know, and maybe that's the cruelest part. The not knowing allows a shadow to stretch across every memory, turning what was once love into something unrecognizable. I watch my father struggle to breathe through the days. He wakes up to a silence that feels wrong, to a space beside him where someone should be. The house is the same. The lake still glistens, but every object, every sound reminds him she is gone. He talks to me about the smallest things, the moments that pierce him the most. The dog who waits, still believing she will return. The little tasks around the house that he used to share with her. The way he sees something beautiful and instinctively reaches to tell her, only to remember she isn't there. His grief is quiet, but crushing, a weight that presses down on the chest until every breath feels like an effort.
I try to hold him, to anchor him, even as my own heart is breaking. I try to make sense of the cruelty of it all. She had asked her lover if he knew what she was giving up. 30 years of marriage, her husband, her daughter, and still she chose him. That knowledge eats at me. It makes me question everything I believed about loyalty, about love, about the stories we tell ourselves to feel safe. And yet, even as I rage at her absence, even as I mourn the mother I thought I had, I can't abandon my father. I can't let him face this alone. Sometimes I lie awake at night, imagining the conversations that could have been. I imagine asking her why. I imagine the apology that never came, the tears that never fell. I imagine her facing my father and saying, "Finally, I am sorry, I was wrong," and I imagine the relief that might have brought. But those conversations exist only in my head. In reality, she walks a path that leaves devastation in her wake, untouched by the consequences, unmoved by the hearts she breaks. And then there's the practical reality, the weight of survival pressing down on my father. The mortgage, the debts, the bills, everything is now his alone. He is forced to make impossible choices, to cut back on things that gave him comfort, to live with fewer small joys while the world around him continues, oblivious to his loss. He cancels subscriptions, trims luxuries, lets go of routines that once brought him happiness, all in an effort to cling to what he loves most. The house by the lake, the last piece of stability he can hold on to. I grieve with him, and I grieve for myself. I grieve for the version of my family I believed in, for the love I thought was unbreakable. I grieve for the mother I thought I had, for the story we were supposed to share, and for the future that has been rewritten without our consent. And yet, amid the heartbreak, there is a stubborn thread of hope. I want to help my father heal. I want to help him find a way to stand tall again, to breathe without the shadow of betrayal pressing on his chest. And if he can do that, perhaps someday I will find a way to heal too. There are moments when I imagine a future where he can smile again, without the weight of her absence pressing him down. Moments when I picture him walking along the lake, the sunlight glinting on the water, feeling the warmth of peace instead of grief. I imagine him laughing again, small joys returning to his days, the dog finally resting without anticipation and disappointment. I hold on to that vision, even as reality remains jagged and painful. Sometimes I cry in the car, driving nowhere, letting tears fall freely because I know I can't do it around him. I let myself feel the anger, the sorrow, the betrayal, knowing that my father doesn't need to carry those fragments of grief alone. And then I return home, put on my strongest face, and sit beside him, letting him speak, letting him cry, letting him unravel while I hold space for him. I am learning what it means to be both daughter and caretaker, to bear someone else's heartbreak while navigating my own. It is exhausting. It is relentless. But I know that if I falter, if I break before he begins to heal, we may both be lost in the wreckage of her decisions. So I hold on. I breathe, I listen, I support, and I wait for the day when the tide will turn, when grief begins to lift, and some semblance of peace returns. Even now, months later, the house by the lake feels different. The walls carry echoes of her absence. The furniture holds shadows. Every room, every corner, seems to whisper reminders of what was lost. And yet, in those same spaces, I see resilience. I see a man who has loved deeply, who has survived unimaginable betrayal, who continues to wake each day and face the world. That resilience is what I cling to. That is what keeps me moving forward. I don't know what my mother feels, or if she even thinks about the lives she left behind. I don't know if she regrets the choices she made, if she pauses at all to consider the wreckage she has caused. All I know is what I feel, what my father feels, and the responsibility I carry to help us navigate the aftermath. Every day is a delicate balance of survival and grief. I try to find small victories, a shared meal with my father where he smiles, a quiet morning by the lake where the air feels calm, a text from him where he describes a fleeting beauty in nature without despair. These moments are lifelines. I clutch them fiercely because they remind me that life continues, that healing is possible, even when the wounds are deep and raw. And so I wait. I support. I grieve. I hold my father's heartbreak alongside my own, and I remind myself that time may yet offer a chance to rebuild, to find peace, to reclaim a life that feels whole again. But for now, the weight is heavy. The absence is palpable, and every day is a careful negotiation with sorrow.
Sometimes when the house is quiet, I sit alone on the porch by the lake and let my mind drift back to the early days before betrayal carved its path through our lives. I remember my parents laughing in the kitchen, her hair catching the morning sunlight as he teased her about something small and silly. I remember them teaching me to ride my bike, holding the handlebars just behind my seat, steadying me when I wobbled, encouraging me with smiles and claps. Those memories feel impossibly distant now, like a world I can observe but never return to. And yet, they are all that remain of the love I believed was permanent. I imagine alternate timelines, ones that exist only in the fragile recesses of my mind. What if she had stayed? What if she had chosen differently that April morning when the affair began? What if she had told my father about her frustrations instead of handing them to someone else, someone outside the marriage, someone who had no right to know the intimate flaws of our family? In those alternate worlds, my father and I sit together in the kitchen, laughing over a clumsy spill of coffee, her hand brushing his in quiet affection. The lake glimmers as it always did, but instead of reflecting sorrow, it reflects warmth, peace, the rhythm of life, unfolding in the right order. But then reality intrudes. I hear my father in the next room, sorting bills, the weight of financial survival pressing down on him like a stormy sky. The dog wanders in, circling, sniffing, waiting for someone who isn't coming back. Each object in that house carries her absence. The scarf left hanging on the coat rack, the mugs she favored stacked in the cupboard, the scent of her perfume that lingers long after she's gone. Everything is a reminder of a life that existed and is no longer ours. I find myself imagining my father's inner world in detail, not because I can know it fully, but because it helps me hold him. I see him walking to the lake at dawn, the fog curling over the water, his reflection fractured across the surface. He reaches out to touch it, as if he could grasp a piece of the life that once made sense. He remembers their anniversaries, the quiet celebrations, the nights of whispered dreams and future plans. He remembers her laughter and feels it like a phantom pain, a ghost of warmth he can no longer reach. And yet, he persists. Each day he rises, feeds the dog, brews the coffee, counts the bills, and goes on. There is a dignity in his persistence, a stubborn refusal to surrender completely to the devastation. That dignity becomes a lifeline for me, a reason to keep going, even when I feel myself crumbling. I try to reconcile my mother's absence in my mind. I imagine her in her new apartment, in the life she chose, and I wonder if there is any trace of regret at all. Does she think about the daughter she left behind? Does she think about the husband she abandoned in a house filled with memories of their shared decades? Or does she live in a bubble, insulated from the wreckage she created, unaware of the consequences of her choices? These questions have no answers, and in their absence, the bitterness of betrayal lodges deeper in my chest. There are moments when I allow myself to confront the rage directly. I picture her in my mind, standing in the living room as she told my father he wasn't enough, as she kissed him goodnight while plotting to leave. I imagine shouting at her, telling her she had no right, demanding she face the damage she caused. I imagine my father watching, silent while I scream the anger that neither of us can fully express aloud. But of course, these confrontations exist only in the theater of my imagination. In reality, the house is silent. Only the wind rustles the trees outside, and the lake laps against the shore, indifferent to human betrayal. I see her movements in vivid detail, tracing the trajectory of her affair, the stolen moments, the nights she stayed out while her husband slept beside her, the careful deletion of her phone's location, the secret lease signed behind our backs. All of it forms a mosaic of deception I can't unsee, and yet I hold on to the small details of my father's reality, the bills he pays with a grim determination, the dog who waits loyally by the window, the routines he maintains to keep life from falling apart completely. These details are fragile, but they are proof that life endures even amid devastation. Some days I imagine what reconciliation would look like, not between my parents, she's gone, but between my father and the life that has been upended. I see him finding new rhythms, establishing new joys, reclaiming the lake as a place of peace rather than a mirror of sorrow. I imagine us planting a garden together, laughter returning in small increments, evenings spent watching the sun dip below the horizon without a shadow pressing down on us. These imagined futures feel like fragile seedlings, easily crushed, but they are necessary. They are what keep me moving forward when despair threatens to overtake every thought. I cannot ignore my own grief. I grieve not only the mother I thought I had, but also the version of myself that existed in the safety of her love. I grieve the family story I believed in, the narrative of stability and devotion that has been violently rewritten. Some nights I lie awake, feeling the weight of dual heartbreak, the raw, palpable pain of my father's suffering, and the quiet, twisting sorrow of my own. I wonder if it is even possible to hold both without breaking entirely, and yet I do. I have no choice but to do so. The lake becomes a metaphor for everything lost and everything that persists. Its surface is calm, but currents run deep beneath, invisible and powerful. Like the lake, life continues, despite the undercurrents of betrayal and grief. My father continues. My life continues. And in that persistence lies a fragile hope. I cling to it, fiercely, knowing that healing will come slowly, in increments too subtle to notice at first. But it will come, if only we are patient and resilient enough to survive the storm. And so I wait, I grieve, I hold space, I watch my father, I support him, I mourn the mother I thought I knew, and I nurture the faint glimmer of hope that one day, even if imperfectly, our hearts might find a rhythm that doesn't ache with absence. Each day, I try to witness beauty where it exists, to find small victories in survival, to honor the love that remains intact between me and my father, between the life we still have and the life we imagined. Sometimes I imagine a future where we can laugh again, unburdened by the betrayal that shattered our past. A future where the dog no longer waits by the window, where the lake reflects serenity instead of sorrow, where the shadows of absence fade into the light. It feels distant, almost impossible, but imagining it gives me strength. I don't know what my mother will do, or if she even thinks of us, but that is no longer the center of my world. My focus is my father, his healing, and our survival. I carry his heartbreak alongside my own, knowing that time will slowly, painfully, stitch the edges of our lives back together. And when that day comes, when laughter and warmth return to the lake house, perhaps then I will allow myself to grieve fully, to let myself feel the long-buried sorrow, and finally start to heal. For now we wait, we endure, we cling to the fragments of life that remain, and in that endurance we find a quiet, stubborn hope that even after betrayal, even after the deepest fractures of the heart, it is possible to survive, to rebuild, to breathe again, and maybe, just maybe, to find a version of peace we once thought lost forever.